The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. Before you completely shut down this bonkers idea, you decide to dig a little deeper. The billionaire's company insists that kids adapt better to Mars, weaker gravity. If they hit puberty up there, their bodies might permanently adjust. Might. Oh, and by the way, these Mars-adapted children probably won't ever be able to come home to Earth. Then you stumble onto the really troubling stuff. Unlike Earth, Mars has zero magnetic protection. Radiation, solar winds, cosmic rays, all of it just hammers the surface. Sure, they've got shielding based on studies of adult astronauts, who already face elevated cancer risks after just a year in space. But what about children? Their cells are dividing like crazy, making them exponentially more vulnerable to DNA damage. Did the planners even think about this? From what you can tell, not really, no. And that gravity situation, only 38% of what we experience here. What does that do to developing bones, hearts, eyes, brains? Adult astronauts already deal with muscle weakness, bone density loss, even their eyeballs changing shape from weightlessness. The risks for children growing up in low gravity are staggering, potentially catastrophic deformities. Did anyone consider how uniquely vulnerable children might be? Once again, apparently not. So would you let them go? Of course not. It sounds absolutely unhinged. Sending kids into an untested, potentially catastrophic environment? Possibly forever? A company charging ahead at full speed? Seemingly clueless or indifferent about how child development actually works? And get this, they didn't even bother to properly verify parental permission. Just a simple checkbox claiming permission was obtained, and they're good to go. It sounds like some twisted science fiction nightmare, doesn't it? Something that could never actually happen. Surely no company could endanger our children on such a massive scale without our informed consent, right? Well, here's the thing. Something remarkably similar, something just as radical and untested, has already happened. Not on Mars, but right here on Earth. Right in the pockets and palms of an entire generation. Today we're exploring a book that unpacks this exact phenomenon. The Anxious Generation. How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness, by social psychologist Jonathan Haidt. You might recognize his name from earlier works like The Happiness Hypothesis or The Righteous Mind. He's dedicated decades to studying human morality, emotion, and well-being. And in recent years, he noticed something deeply disturbing, something he first examined with Greg Lukianoff in The Coddling of the American Mind. He observed a sudden, sharp nosedive in adolescent mental health starting around the early 2010s. Anxiety, depression, self-harm, suicide rates all began climbing, with girls hit especially hard. This wasn't just happening in America. It was unfolding across developed nations worldwide. Why? What changed so dramatically in such a short window of time? Haidt argues it wasn't a single factor, but rather a perfect storm he calls the Great Rewiring of childhood. We started fiercely overprotecting children in the physical world, driven by escalating fears since the 80s and 90s, while simultaneously leaving them completely exposed in a new, rapidly expanding virtual world. This virtual realm, delivered primarily through smartphones and social media apps that exploded between 2010 and 2015, fundamentally transformed how an entire generation experienced growing up. It replaced the messy, challenging, essential experiences of a play-based childhood with a screen-based one. By the time we finish today, you'll understand the profound impact this shift has had, not just on mental health statistics, but on development, social connection, focus, and even our sense of meaning. You'll see the science behind why this digital environment poses such unique challenges for young, developing minds. And most importantly, you'll discover that it's not too late. Haidt offers clear, actionable steps for parents, schools, governments, and young people themselves to reclaim childhood, to bring it back down to earth. This isn't just about understanding a crisis, it's about discovering a way forward. Let's dive in together. So where does this story actually begin? It starts with a puzzle. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, adolescent mental health in many Western countries seemed relatively stable, maybe even slightly improving. Then, somewhere around 2010 to 2012, everything took a sharp, devastating turn. It was like watching someone flip a switch. Jonathan Haidt presents graph after graph, documenting this alarming shift. Rates of major depressive episodes among American teens started climbing steeply around 2012. For girls, the rate jumped by a staggering 145% between 2010 and 2020. For boys, it was 161% relative to their lower starting point. By 2020, nearly 1 in 4 American teenage girls reported experiencing a major depressive episode in the past year. And we're not just talking about self-reported feelings here. Emergency room visits for self-harm among young adolescent girls, ages 10 to 14, nearly tripled between 2010 and 2020. Suicide rates for that same group rose 167% between 2010 and 2021. While boys' rates of self-harm didn't spike quite as dramatically, their suicide rates also increased significantly. Crucially, this wasn't just an American crisis. Haidt demonstrates similar, synchronized trends emerging in Canada, the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and even the Nordic countries like Finland, Sweden, and Norway. Reports of feeling lonely, or like an outsider at school, began rising sharply among 15-year-olds across the Western world after 2012. Something global, or at least widespread across developed nations, seemed to be affecting young people around the same time. What could possibly explain this? Some people pointed to the 2008 financial crisis, but teen mental health didn't collapse in 2009 during the worst of the downturn. It actually started declining as the economy recovered through the 2010s. And why would an economic crisis hit preteen girls the hardest? Others suggest climate change anxiety. But historically, collective threats tend to energize young people and unite them, not isolate and depress them. Plus, the timing doesn't quite align with the spike in the early 2010s, before climate activism reached its more recent intensity. School shootings? American politics? Those couldn't explain the simultaneous rise in anxiety and depression in Canada, the UK, or Scandinavia. Haidt argues that the most compelling explanation, the one that actually fits both the timing and the international scope, lies in a profound technological and cultural transformation, the Great Rewiring of childhood. This rewiring didn't happen overnight. It had roots that reached back decades, to the 1980s and 90s. This marked the beginning of the end for what Haidt calls the play-based childhood. Think back, or ask older relatives about childhood before the 90s. Kids used to roam. From first or second grade, maybe age 6 or 7, they'd walk to school, play outside without supervision, invent games, work out their own conflicts, and come home when the streetlights flickered on. But starting in the 80s and accelerating through the 90s, parenting culture, especially in English-speaking countries like the US, UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, began to shift. Driven by a complex brew of factors including sensationalist media coverage of rare child abductions, a breakdown in neighborhood trust, what sociologist Frank Ferretti called the collapse of adult solidarity, and maybe even rising college admission pressures for some families, parents became increasingly fearful. The real world started to seem incredibly dangerous, even though, statistically, it was actually becoming safer for children in most ways. This led to what Haidt calls overprotection in the real world. Childhood independence vanished. Unsupervised outdoor play plummeted. Playgrounds were redesigned to eliminate virtually any possibility of minor injury. School recess times shrank. Parents started spending far more time directly supervising their children, even as they had less free time themselves. A culture of safety ISM emerged, where preventing any potential harm, physical or even emotional, became the ultimate value, overshadowing other needs like independence or resilience. We started treating children like fragile objects, like delicate porcelain, rather than recognizing what they actually are. Because, Haidt argues, drawing on Nassim Taleb's work, children are anti-fragile. They aren't just resilient, bouncing back from challenges. They actually need challenges, stressors, and even minor failures to grow strong, like trees needing wind to develop sturdy roots and trunks. The small scrapes, arguments, and disappointments of unsupervised play act like inoculations, building what you might call their psychological immune system. They learn frustration tolerance, emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and self-reliance. And crucially, they need risky play. Not reckless danger, but the thrilling, exciting play that involves a risk of minor physical injury. Climbing trees, riding bikes fast, roughhousing, exploring unknown places. Why does this matter so much? Because, as researchers Ellen Sandsetter and Leif Kinnair discovered, these thrilling experiences have antiphobic effects. Children are born with certain innate fears of heights, separation, and so on. By gradually seeking out and mastering manageable risks, they overcome these fears. Fear transforms into thrill and triumph. They learn to assess risk for themselves. They build genuine competence and confidence. Overprotection blocks this vital developmental process, leaving kids more anxious and less capable of handling the real world. It keeps them stuck in what Haidt calls defend mode, constantly scanning for threats, rather than allowing them to operate primarily in discover mode, where they're open to opportunities and learning. This shrinking of the real world for kids was the first act of the story. The stage was set. Kids were spending more time indoors, more time under watchful eyes, with fewer opportunities for the kind of free, unstructured, risky play that their developing brains desperately needed. Then came the second act, the explosion of the virtual world, delivered right into their hands. The Internet arrived in homes during the 90s, mostly through desktop computers. This first wave, Haidt notes, didn't correlate with declining teen mental health. Millennials grew up with it, but their access was often limited, maybe a shared family computer, maybe frustratingly slow dial-up connections. The real game changer was the second wave, which peaked between 2010 and 2015. This was propelled by the rapid adoption of smartphones, coupled with high-speed mobile internet, and the fundamental transformation of social media. The iPhone arrived in 2007, the App Store in 2008. Social media platforms like Facebook introduced the like and retweet buttons in 2009, transforming them from simple networking tools into engines for viral performance and social validation. Front-facing cameras arrived in 2010, fueling image-focused platforms like Instagram, which Facebook acquired and supercharged in 2012. Suddenly, the virtual world wasn't just something you occasionally visited. It was something you carried everywhere in your pocket, accessible 24/7. This marked the transition to the phone-based childhood. By 2015, most American teens had smartphones. They reported spending hours each day just on social media, and an average of nearly 7 hours daily of leisure screen time overall, including TV, videos, games, and social media. A quarter of teens in 2015 said they were online almost constantly, a number that nearly doubled by 2022. This wasn't merely a quantitative shift, it was fundamentally qualitative. The phone became what Haidt calls an experience blocker. It actively pushed out real-world activities. Time spent hanging out with friends face-to-face plummeted dramatically during precisely these years. Even when teens were physically together, the mere presence of phones degraded the quality of their interactions. As MIT professor Sherry Turkle memorably put it, "We are forever elsewhere." This phone-based childhood, Haidt argues, fundamentally disrupts the developmental needs we explored earlier. Remember attunement, that deep, synchronous connection, built through face-to-face interaction, shared emotions, and perfectly timed responses, starting from infancy? Social media interaction is largely asynchronous, disembodied, performative, and often involves broadcasting to many, rather than connecting deeply with one or a few people. It essentially starves kids of the rich, embodied social cues they need to develop social skills and emotional regulation. Remember social learning. Kids are hardwired to learn by copying others, using conformist bias do what's common, and prestige bias copy high-status individuals. Social media platforms became hyper-efficient engines for both. They instantly showcase what's trending and amplify the signals of prestige through likes and followers, often disconnecting prestige from real-world excellence. Instead of learning from diverse role models in their local community, kids' attention became laser-focused on a narrow range of online influencers, often promoting wildly unrealistic lifestyles or appearances. And critically, this all happened during the most sensitive periods of development, especially puberty, roughly ages 9 to 15, when the brain is rapidly rewiring itself and particularly receptive to cultural learning. Gen Z became the first generation to navigate this critical developmental window, while completely immersed in the smartphone-mediated virtual world. Studies suggest that social media use during these specific years, around 11 to 13 for girls and 14 to 15 for boys, correlates most strongly with later life dissatisfaction. The legal minimum age for most platforms, 13, seems dangerously low given this particular vulnerability. So the Great Rewiring created a profound mismatch between children's and adolescents' developmental needs and the environment they were actually growing up in. This mismatch, Haidt argues, manifests in 4 foundational harms. First, social deprivation. As we've seen, the sheer time spent on devices displaced crucial face-to-face interaction. This isn't just about quantity. The quality of online interaction fundamentally differs. It's less embodied, less synchronous, often more superficial and performative. This leads to increased loneliness, despite being constantly connected. It actively hinders the development of real-world social skills. Second, sleep deprivation. Teens naturally experience a shift in their sleep cycles during puberty, wanting to go to bed later. Early school start times already create pressure. Smartphones dramatically exacerbate this problem. Screens in the bedroom, the stimulating nature of content, the fear of missing out, the blue light suppressing melatonin production, all contribute to teens getting far less than the 8 to 10 hours of sleep they actually need. And chronic sleep deprivation impacts everything: mood, focus, learning, decision-making, even physical health. Netflix's CEO wasn't joking when he declared, "We're competing with sleep." Third, Attention fragmentation. Our minds thrive on focused attention, what William James described as the ability to withdraw from some things to deal effectively with others. The digital environment, especially on mobile devices, is essentially kryptonite for focus. Constant notifications. One study found an average of 192 per day from top apps, infinite scroll, hyperlinks. They all train the brain for distraction, for constantly flitting from one stimulus to the next. This makes deep thinking, genuine reflection, and even paying attention in class incredibly difficult. The mere presence of a smartphone nearby can reduce cognitive capacity. For adolescents, whose executive functions like planning, self-control, and focus are still actively developing in the frontal cortex, this constant interruption may actually hinder that very development. Fourth, addiction. This is perhaps the most insidious harm. Platforms are deliberately designed to be addictive, using principles straight from behaviorist psychology. Think of the hooked model, described by Nir Eyal. A trigger, often a notification, an action, checking the app, a variable reward, the unpredictable dopamine hit from likes, comments, or new content, and investment through posting, building a profile, or creating streaks. This loop, especially the variable reward schedule that works like a slot machine, creates powerful, often compulsive habits. The teenage brain, with its heightened sensitivity to rewards and still developing impulse control, is particularly vulnerable. Addiction researcher Anna Lemke calls the smartphone the modern-day hypodermic needle, delivering digital dopamine around the clock. This isn't merely about wasting time. It can lead to actual withdrawal symptoms like anxiety, irritability, insomnia, and dysphoria when access is removed. It fundamentally rewires the brain's reward pathways. These four harms don't exist in isolation. They interact, creating vicious feedback loops. Sleep deprivation worsens anxiety and fragments attention even further. Social deprivation increases loneliness, which makes the allure of online connection even stronger. Addiction fuels all the other harms simultaneously. Now, while these harms affect most young people to some degree, the data clearly shows the mental health crisis hit girls first and hardest. Why? Haidt outlines several converging reasons. Girls use social media more intensively, especially the visually oriented platforms like Instagram and TikTok, which research consistently rates as potentially worse for mental health due to their heavy emphasis on appearance and lifestyle. Girls are more profoundly affected by visual social comparison and perfectionism. Social media bombards them with carefully curated, often filtered and digitally manipulated images of peers and influencers, setting completely unattainable standards for beauty and life success. This constantly triggers what researchers call the sociometer, that internal gauge of social standing, leading to chronic anxiety and plummeting self-esteem. This gets amplified by socially prescribed perfectionism, the crushing feeling of needing to meet impossibly high external standards, which rose sharply among girls throughout the 2010s. Girls' aggression tends to be more relational in nature. While boys might be more physically aggressive, girls often compete and attack through social exclusion, gossip, and reputation damage. Social media provides devastatingly powerful new tools for this, making relational aggression easier, more wide-reaching, and permanently documented. Cyberbullying surged dramatically for girls in the 2010s. Girls more readily share emotions with each other, making them particularly susceptible to emotional contagion and what's called sociogenic illness. Studies show depression can actually spread through social networks, and it spreads more easily among women. Online, where extreme displays often attract more attention, what's called audience capture, this can amplify negative emotions. Haidt suggests the rapid spread of anxiety and depression and even recent phenomena like the sudden rise in tic-like behaviors or self-diagnosed cases of dissociative identity disorder clustering on TikTok might be partly explained by this online social contagion. Girls face more online predation and harassment. The internet makes it disturbingly easier for adult men to contact and exploit underage girls. The pressure to share intimate photos, and the subsequent shaming and bullying when those photos inevitably leak, creates a hostile environment that forces girls into constant defend mode. Ultimately, social media promises connection and communion, which is a stronger drive for girls, but it often delivers quantity over quality, resulting in shallower friendships and profound aching loneliness. But what about boys? Their story differs, Haidt suggests, perhaps more complex and slower developing. While their rates of anxiety and depression also climbed in the 2010s, and suicide rates remain tragically high, some troubling trends actually started earlier. Boys began disengaging from the real world, spending less time with friends, and showing declining belief in their chances for future success, even back in the 2000s or earlier. Haidt uses what he calls a push-pull analysis. The push came from structural changes that made the real world less hospitable for traditional forms of masculinity starting in the 1970s. Deindustrialization that valued communication skills over physical strength, schools that perhaps better suited girls, learning styles, fewer male role models especially in education. Safetyism also hit boys particularly hard, drastically curtailing rough and tumble and risky play that's crucial for their development. The pull came from the virtual world, which offered increasingly compelling ways for boys to meet their needs for agency mastery, competition, exploration, and even communion, without facing the risks and complexities of the real world. This pull intensified dramatically with high-speed internet, powerful gaming consoles, and then smartphones. Two major pulls for boys have been pornography. Unlimited, free, hardcore pornography became easily accessible around the clock, especially with private devices. Haidt argues this hijacks evolutionary drives, potentially making real-world relationships seem less appealing or more complicated, reducing sexual satisfaction with actual partners, and contributing to social isolation. AI-powered virtual partners might dramatically worsen this trend. Video games. The picture here gets more nuanced. Games can genuinely offer cognitive benefits, stress relief, and social connection. However, for a significant minority, perhaps around 7% of boys, gaming becomes genuinely problematic or addictive, seriously interfering with sleep, school performance, relationships, and real-world functioning. Even for non-addicted heavy users, the sheer opportunity cost is enormous, displacing time for physical activity, real-world socializing, and adequate sleep. Online gaming provides a simulation of teamwork and risk-taking, but it fundamentally lacks the embodied, self-governing aspects of real-world play that build crucial social skills and anti-phobic resilience. The result for many boys has been a gradual withdrawal from real-world engagement. They show declining participation in traditional, adult activities like getting a driver's license, working part-time jobs, or dating, trends that started before the smartphone era but accelerated afterward. They show a marked decrease in actually enjoying risk-taking and a dramatic drop in hospitalizations for unintentional injuries, suggesting significantly less physical activity and exploration. There's a concerning rise in failure to launch, young men really struggling to transition to independent adulthood. In extreme cases, this manifests as the hikikomori phenomenon, a complete withdrawal into one's bedroom, sustained entirely by the virtual world. Perhaps most profoundly, this detachment from stable real-world communities leads to what sociologist Emile Durkheim called anomie, a state of normlessness where shared values and social bonds dissolve. Without the grounding and structure that real communities provide, life can feel adrift, utterly directionless. This, Haidt suggests, might explain why both boys and girls showed a sharp increase in agreeing that life often feels meaningless, starting in the early 2010s. The virtual world, for all its constant stimulation, leaves a deep human need fundamentally unmet. Finally, Haidt broadens the lens beyond clinical mental illness to discuss what he calls spiritual degradation. He uses spiritual, not necessarily in a religious sense, but referring to a dimension of human experience related to elevation, meaning and connection to something larger than the self, versus degradation, pettiness, and self-absorption. He argues the phone-based life pulls us downward on this dimension by systematically undermining practices vital for human flourishing, practices often cultivated across wisdom traditions. Shared sacredness. Real-world communities create shared meaning through rituals and designated sacred times and places. The virtual world is flat, undifferentiated, always on, and mostly profane. Embodiment. Spiritual practices often involve bodies moving together, synchronizing, sharing meals. The virtual world is fundamentally disembodied. Stillness, silence, and focus. Practices like meditation cultivate inner calm and sustained attention. The phone-based life delivers a relentless barrage of stimuli, constantly fragmenting attention. Self-transcendence. Experiences of awe and connection that quiet the ego, what neuroscientists call the brain's default mode network. Social media hyperactivates the self, focusing obsessively on performance, comparison, and validation. Being slow to anger, quick to forgive. Wisdom traditions counsel compassion and understanding. Social media often actively encourages quick, harsh judgment, and tribal outrage. Finding awe in nature. Nature provides powerful experiences of awe and self-transcendence. The phone-based life keeps us trapped indoors or constantly distracted when we actually venture outside. There's what Pascal called a God-shaped hole, a yearning for deeper meaning. The phone-based life, Haidt concludes, too often fills it with triviality and degradation, coloring our thoughts and thus diminishing the quality of our inner lives. But the story doesn't end in despair. Haidt firmly believes we're not helpless here. The current situation arose from a series of what economists call collective action problems, traps where individuals, kids, parents, even tech companies feel forced into choices they know aren't ideal, simply because everyone else is doing it. But here's the thing about collective action problems. They have collective solutions. We can coordinate. We can shift norms. We can implement technological solutions. We can pass better laws. Haidt proposes 4 foundational reforms as the core pillars for meaningful change. 1. No smartphones before high school, roughly age 14. Give kids basic phones for communication if needed. 2. No social media before 16. Let kids get through the most vulnerable phase of brain development first. 3. Phone-free schools. Use lockers or pouches like Yonder to create environments where students can actually focus and socialize face-to-face. 4. Far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. Actively revive the play-based childhood. These reforms require coordination, but they're absolutely achievable. Governments can help by updating laws like COPPA, raising the age of Internet adulthood to 16 and actually enforcing it, facilitating proper age verification, clarifying child neglect laws to protect parents who grant reasonable independence, and actively supporting more play in schools. Schools can implement phone-free policies and radically increase opportunities for free play and extended recess. And parents, especially when acting together in coordinated groups, can delay smartphones, set real limits on screen time, actively prioritize real-world experiences, and consciously grant more independence. The message is genuinely urgent, but it's also deeply hopeful. We accidentally exiled our children to a metaphorical Mars. It's time, Haidt insists, to bring childhood back to Earth. Reading The Anxious Generation feels like finally understanding the source of that strange smoke that's been filling the room for the past decade. We've all sensed something is seriously wrong, especially concerning young people's well-being. But Jonathan Haidt connects the dots with remarkable clarity and mountains of compelling evidence. He gives language to our collective unease, clearly identifying the Great Rewiring and its profound, far-reaching consequences. What strikes me most powerfully is the dual nature of the problem he identifies, the simultaneous overprotection in the physical world combined with dramatic underprotection in the virtual one. It's a paradox born of genuinely good intentions leading to devastating unintended consequences. We desperately wanted to keep kids safe from perceived physical dangers, but in doing so we accidentally deprived them of the very experiences that unsupervised play, manageable risks, real-world social navigation that actually build resilience, genuine competence, and authentic confidence. We essentially prevented them from developing their natural anti-fragility. At the exact same time, we handed them powerful, deliberately addictive technologies connected to an essentially unregulated digital world, often before their brains were remotely equipped to handle the constant stimulation, intense social pressures, and potential psychological harms. It's genuinely like meticulously child-proofing every corner of a house and then casually leaving a loaded weapon on the coffee table. The framework of discover mode versus defend mode feels incredibly useful and clarifying. A childhood rich in play, exploration, and steadily growing independence literally wires the developing brain to be open, curious, and resilient, to naturally operate in discover mode. A childhood dominated by fear, constant supervision, and anxieties amplified by the virtual world wires the brain for constant threat detection, fragility, and withdrawal. It gets stuck in defend mode. This helps explain not just the dramatic rise in anxiety disorders, but perhaps also the broader shift away from healthy risk-taking and the pervasive sense of listlessness so many young people report. The call to recognize childhood independence not as dangerous neglect but as an absolute necessity for healthy development feels genuinely revolutionary in today's anxious climate, yet it's firmly rooted in millennia of human experience and solid developmental science. It requires a real shift in mindset, moving away from the Dallepo carpenter, parent frantically trying to perfectly shape a child, towards becoming the Dallepo gardener, parent who thoughtfully provides the right conditions for natural flourishing. So what can you, as a young person navigating this complicated world, or perhaps thinking seriously about future generations, actually take away from all this? First, recognize the environment you're operating in. Truly understand that the digital tools you use daily are deliberately designed to capture your attention and keep you hooked, using sophisticated psychological techniques. Awareness is genuinely the first crucial step toward regaining real control. Start noticing honestly how much time you actually spend on screens versus genuinely engaging with the physical world and the people physically around you. How does it actually make you feel? Second, actively cultivate real-world connection and embodied experience. Make it a genuine priority to spend face-to-face time with friends. Actively seek out activities that involve your body and engage your senses, especially getting outdoors. Challenge yourself with small, manageable risks. Learn a genuinely new skill. Navigate somewhere unfamiliar on your own. Speak up when it feels difficult or uncomfortable. Intentionally build your own anti-fragility. Third, fiercely protect your sleep and your ability to focus. Make your bedroom a genuinely phone-free sanctuary. Practice deliberate periods of disconnection, even short ones initially, to allow your mind to actually rest and consolidate memories and learning. Try turning off notifications for all non-essential apps. Fourth, become a conscious gardener of your own mind and attention. Pay genuine attention to the content you're consuming. Does it genuinely uplift you, inspire you, make you feel connected in a real, authentic way? Or does it consistently leave you feeling anxious, inadequate, drained, or hollow? Curate your digital environment as deliberately and thoughtfully as you would choose your closest friends or the food you put in your body. This isn't about completely rejecting technology or returning to some imagined past. It's about finding genuine balance. It's about ensuring that the virtual world actually serves our real lives and deepest needs, rather than quietly consuming them. It's about recognizing that the path to genuine flourishing in adulthood is paved with real-world experiences, actual challenges overcome, and authentic human connections. It's about bringing ourselves and our collective approach to childhood back to earth. That was a deep exploration of The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. We've covered the core arguments, examined the evidence, and discussed the proposed path forward. But honestly, listening to me talk about it is a bit like looking at travel photos instead of actually taking the trip yourself. There's a richness and depth in Haidt's own words, in the specific studies he carefully details, and in the nuance of his full arguments that we simply can't capture completely in a summary. If the ideas we discussed today, the fundamental shifts in childhood, the real impact of technology, the practical ways we might rebuild a healthier environment for young people, have sparked something in you or raised important questions, I genuinely encourage you to pick up the actual book. Reading it yourself isn't just passively absorbing information, it's actively engaging with a powerful, timely analysis of our current moment that might genuinely change how you see the world, your own daily habits, and the future we're collectively building. There's a link to the book in the description below. And if this summary brought you some real value today, if it gave you a fresh perspective or helped clarify something important you've been thinking about, do me a small favor and hit that like button. Even better, subscribe to the channel. We regularly explore transformative books like this one, working to unpack the wisdom that can genuinely help us all lead richer, more meaningful, more intentional lives. Let's keep learning and growing together on this journey.